The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It pounded against the glass windows of the quiet diner on the corner of Willow Street, painting the world outside in streaks of silver. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of coffee and fried eggs, though only one man sat at the counter. His name was Marcus. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of presence that made people look twice. He wasn't flashy, he didn't seek attention, but he carried himself with a calm strength, the kind born from years of keeping his head down in a world that often looked at him like he didn't belong. Marcus sipped his coffee, his eyes lost in thought. He had no idea that in a few minutes, his quiet evening would turn into something he could never have imagined. The bell over the diner's door jingled. She walked in. A white woman, mid-30s, drenched from the rain, eyes wide as if she had just run from something, or someone. Her name was Claire. She scanned the room in desperation, her breath coming fast. And then her eyes locked on Marcus. "Excuse me," she rushed to his side, lowering her voice. "Please. I need your help." Marcus frowned, setting his cup down. "Ma'am, I think you got the wrong." "No," she cut him off, her voice trembling. "I need you to pretend to be my husband. Just for tonight. Please." Her words hung in the air like thunder. Marcus blinked, certain he hadn't heard right. Pretend to be her husband? He glanced around, half expecting a prank, but her trembling hands and frantic eyes told him this was no joke. "Why me?" Marcus asked quietly. Claire swallowed hard. "Because the man I'm supposed to meet, he won't believe I'm married unless he sees it. And if he doesn't believe it, I'm in danger. Real danger." Marcus's gut told him to walk away. This wasn't his problem. But something in her voice, something raw, scared, and breaking, made him pause. "You're serious," Marcus said, more statement than question. She nodded. Rainwater dripped from her hair onto the counter. "Please. Just for one day. After that, you'll never have to see me again." Marcus studied her, his jaw tight. His life was already complicated enough. Yet here she was, begging a complete stranger, begging him. The silence stretched, heavy with tension. Finally, Marcus let out a slow breath. "All right. One day. But you better tell me everything." Claire's eyes flooded with relief. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." Marcus didn't respond. His instinct screamed that this was the kind of decision that changed lives. And he was right. "Before we continue, let me ask you this. Where are you watching from right now? I'd love to know where our audience is joining us from as this story unfolds." Marcus sat back in the booth as Claire slid in across from him, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her coffee cup. The diner's neon lights flickered against the rain-streaked window, painting her face in shades of red and blue. "You better start talking," Marcus said, his deep voice low but firm. "What kind of danger are we talking about?" Claire's lips parted, but for a moment she just stared at him, as if weighing how much to say. Finally, she leaned closer. "My ex," she whispered. "He won't leave me alone. He's powerful, connected. He doesn't believe I've moved on. Tonight, he demanded to meet my husband. If I don't bring one, he'll know I've been lying. And then—" Her voice cracked. She looked down at her cup, her knuckles white against the porcelain. Marcus exhaled slowly, the weight of her words settling over him. A powerful man. An ex who didn't take no for an answer. And she had chosen him, a stranger, to stand in that storm. "You sure dragging me into this is safer than just telling him the truth?" Marcus asked. Claire's eyes snapped up. "The truth could get me killed." The diner seemed to shrink around them. Marcus felt the air grow heavier, pressing against his chest. He wasn't a man who liked entanglements, but something in her eyes, fear mixed with fierce determination, told him this wasn't about weakness. This was about survival. "All right," Marcus said, leaning forward. "If I'm playing husband, I need to know the part. Where'd we meet? How long we been together? You can't expect me to walk in blind." Claire's lips curved into a shaky, grateful smile. "You're right. We'll keep it simple. We met at work. I was—" "A secretary?" Marcus interrupted, skeptical. Claire smirked faintly, despite herself. "A marketing consultant. You were a contractor. Strong, dependable, always showing up early. I noticed you." One thing led to another. Marcus arched a brow. You're a fast thinker. Necessity, Claire muttered, taking a sip of coffee as if it could steady her nerves. Fine, Marcus said. But you better know, if this blows up, I'm not sticking around to pick up the pieces. Claire nodded, though her eyes betrayed the flicker of doubt. I understand. But Marcus knew she didn't. The rain hadn't let up. Marcus drove Claire's old sedan through the winding streets until they reached the kind of neighborhood where money dripped from every brick. Mansions lined the road, their iron gates looming like silent guards. Marcus glanced at Claire. She was pale, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. This him? Marcus asked as they pulled into a long driveway where black luxury cars were parked like soldiers. Claire nodded. His name's Richard. Her voice trembled. Don't let him see you flinch. He thrives on it. Marcus clenched the steering wheel. Don't worry about me. As they stepped out, the storm seemed to hush, the air thick with an eerie stillness. The mansion towered above them, lights blazing from every window. Music spilled out from inside, laughter trailing with it. Claire slipped her arm through Marcus's, her touch light uncertain. For a moment, Marcus felt the fragility in her bones. You ready? She whispered. Marcus gave her a steady look. Let's go meet your nightmare. The party was alive with polished laughter and clinking glasses. Men in tailored suits and women in glittering dresses filled the space, each one a portrait of wealth and power. Then came Richard. He stood at the top of the staircase like a king surveying his kingdom. Tall, sharp-featured, with cold blue eyes that burned into Claire the moment he saw her. Claire, Richard said, his voice smooth but laced with venom. He descended the stairs slowly, his gaze never leaving her. And who is this? Claire swallowed hard, tightening her grip on Marcus's arm. This is my husband, Marcus. Richard's eyes flicked to Marcus, a smirk tugging at his lips. Husband, huh? Funny, I don't remember getting an invitation to the wedding. Marcus met his gaze evenly, his voice steady. Guess your name must have gotten lost in the mail. The room stilled. Conversations paused, heads turned. A ripple of tension spread like electricity through the crowd. Richard's smirk faltered, just slightly. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, but Marcus didn't flinch. He stood like stone, every inch of him daring Richard to push harder. Interesting, Richard said finally, circling them like a predator. I didn't think Claire had it in her to choose someone like you. Marcus tilted his head. Maybe you never really knew her at all. For the first time, Richard's mask cracked, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. Claire's hand trembled against Marcus's arm. But behind that fear, something else flickered. Admiration, gratitude, a spark she hadn't expected to feel. And Marcus? He realized this wasn't just going to be one night. Not anymore. The air in the mansion grew charged, every glance heavy with unspoken threats. Richard smiled again, though it was colder now. Well, he said, lifting a glass of champagne. Let's welcome the happy couple, shall we? The toast was met with polite claps, but the eyes that lingered told another story. Marcus knew they had just stepped into a game, and the stakes were higher than Claire had let on. The night pressed on inside Richard's mansion like a stage play, each guest playing their role with polished smiles and sharpened whispers. Marcus, though, wasn't acting. He stood tall beside Claire, his hand resting lightly against her back, steady, protective, believable. Richard circled them like a hawk, glass in hand. His voice carried across the room, smooth but slicing at every syllable. So Marcus, he said, his blue eyes glinting with cruel amusement. What is it that you do? Surely Claire hasn't married lightly. Marcus held his gaze. I work with my hands. Build things. Fix what's broken. Richard smirked. How poetic. Fixing things. Tell me, Claire, is that what drew you to him? The way he fixes you. The room rippled with thin laughter. Claire's face burned, but Marcus spoke before she could. Funny, Marcus said evenly, a man who breaks everything he touches laughing at someone who builds. The air split. The laughter died. Even the string quartet in the corner seemed to falter. Richard's smirk tightened into something darker. His glass clinked as he set it down too hard. "You've got a sharp tongue." Marcus leaned in slightly, his voice low enough to cut, but calm enough to hold control. "Sharp enough to remind you, she's not yours anymore." For the first time, Richard's charm cracked like glass under pressure. His jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around the glass stem. Claire's pulse raced, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. Marcus's presence didn't just shield her. It challenged Richard's dominance in ways she never dared to. They sat at a long oak table, candles flickering, wine poured into crystal. Richard had arranged it like a performance, Claire and Marcus at one end, Richard at the other, his eyes never leaving them. "Tell me, Marcus," Richard drawled, slicing into a steak. "What's it like, living with Claire? Does she make you feel like a man?" Marcus's fork paused. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. "She makes me feel like I've got something worth protecting." Claire froze. Her throat tightened as heat flooded her chest. Those words weren't part of their plan. Richard's smile was thin as paper. "How touching. And here I thought Claire was always too fragile, too dependent. Looks like I was wrong." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his voice even. "Yeah, you were." The silence roared louder than the storm outside. By dessert, Richard had grown restless, his pride bruised. He leaned forward, his voice now stripped of its charm. "Tell me, Marcus, what makes you think you belong here?" His gaze swept the room, the chandeliers, the silk, the velvet-lined walls. "Men like you don't last long in my world." Marcus's eyes hardened. "Maybe your world isn't as big as you think." Richard's jaw twitched, his control slipping. The guest shifted uncomfortably, sensing a fracture in the facade. Claire's hand, resting under the table, brushed Marcus's. She hadn't meant to, but when he didn't pull away, something surged in her chest. It was dangerous, wrong. But in that touch was a truth she hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't just safe with him. She was drawn to him. The storm outside had grown violent, wind rattling the windows. Richard cornered Claire as Marcus excused himself to the restroom. "You think you can fool me?" Richard hissed, his hand clamping down on her arm. "He's not your husband. You think I don't see through this little show?" Claire's breath hitched. Panic surged through her veins. But before she could answer, a shadow moved behind her. Marcus's voice was quiet, but it shook the air. "Let her go." Richard's hand froze. Slowly, he turned, meeting Marcus's eyes. The storm outside roared as lightning lit up the room, casting them in sharp relief. For the first time that night, it wasn't Richard who commanded the space. It was Marcus. Claire's heart thundered as she watched the two men face off, predator and protector. For years, Richard had dictated her life with money, fear, and control. But here was Marcus, a stranger, standing with more courage than anyone in her world ever had. And she couldn't deny it anymore. Something inside her shifted. Something dangerous. Something irresistible. If you're gripped by this story so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. We've got even more powerful stories coming your way, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The storm outside had become a fury, rain hammering the mansion, as if the skies themselves were impatient for what was to come. Inside, the air hung thick, heavy with the stench of old power and new defiance. Richard's grip loosened, but only because Marcus's presence made it impossible to hold on without revealing weakness. Claire stumbled back, rubbing her arm where bruises would surely bloom by morning. Marcus stepped forward, his eyes unblinking. "You put your hands on her again, and I won't just walk away." Richard's smirk returned, but it was thinner now, stretched over anger. "Careful, Marcus. Men like you don't make threats in houses like mine." Marcus didn't blink. Wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Lightning cracked, throwing jagged light across Richard's sharp features. For the first time in years, Claire saw him rattled. It was subtle, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, the tightening of his jaw. But it was there, and it was Marcus who put it there. Claire led Marcus out onto a covered terrace. The rain pelted down just feet away, turning the garden into rivers of mud and silver. She clutched her shawl tighter, her eyes fixed on the storm. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Marcus leaned against the railing, his broad frame outlined by the storm's glow. Yeah, I did. Claire turned to him, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes alive with something she hadn't felt in years, hope. You don't even know me. Why put yourself in danger for someone like me? Marcus's gaze stayed on the horizon. Because I know what it's like when no one stands up for you. The words cut through her like thunder. Claire's throat tightened, her chest burning. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. You're supposed to be pretending. But I don't know anymore. Marcus finally turned, his eyes locking with hers. Neither do I. The space between them shrank, pulled tight by something neither of them could name or resist. Claire's breath hitched, her heart hammering. For the first time since she walked into that diner, she wasn't acting. A voice cut through the storm. Well, Richard drawled, stepping onto the terrace, his face shadowed by fury. Look at the happy couple, sharing secrets in my house. Claire jerked back instinctively, shame and fear clashing in her chest. But Marcus didn't move. He held Richard's gaze, unshaken. You've made your point tonight, Richard spat. You think you can walk in here, play hero, and take what's mine? Don't. Marcus's voice was steady. She was never yours to take. Richard's eyes flared. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to venom. You don't belong here. And when this game ends, Marcus, you won't leave this house standing tall. The words were more than a threat. They were a promise, cold and final. Claire's stomach dropped. She reached for Marcus's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Please, let's just go. But Marcus didn't flinch. We'll leave when she's ready. Richard's laugh was hollow. Then you'd better pray you make it to the door. The guests were gone now, whisked away as the storm worsened. The house seemed emptier, darker, a battlefield waiting for its final blow. Claire sat at the edge of a velvet sofa, her hands trembling. Marcus stood by the fire, his silhouette carved by the flames. You shouldn't have come with me tonight, Claire whispered, tears in her voice. I've dragged you into something you can't fight. Marcus turned, his expression softer now. Maybe, but I'm here, and I'm not letting him break you anymore. Her tears spilled. She pressed her face into her hands, shoulders shaking. I've been so afraid for so long. I forgot what it felt like to breathe. Marcus knelt in front of her, gently pulling her hands away. Then breathe now. Her eyes lifted to his, wet and shining. Something inside her broke open, raw and unstoppable. She leaned forward, pressing her lips against his, desperate, trembling, real. Marcus froze for a heartbeat. Then his hand slid to her cheek, pulling her closer, steadying her trembling with his strength. The kiss wasn't part of the plan, but it felt like the only truth in the room. At the top of the stairs, Richard watched in silence, his fists clenched white, his eyes burning with fury. The storm outside had found its mirror in the storm inside his chest, and he would not let it end this way. The house groaned under the storm's rage, thunder rattling the chandeliers as if the mansion itself feared what was coming. Claire and Marcus sat by the fire, their breaths still heavy from the kiss neither of them could take back. But upstairs, Richard was descending, each step slow, deliberate, his fury sharpening with every breath. When he entered the room, the silence cracked. So this is what it comes to, Richard said, his voice like ice. My Claire, kissing a man she plucked off the street. Claire flinched. Marcus rose to his feet, his shoulders squared. She's not yours anymore, Marcus said, his voice steady as stone. Richard's laugh was low, bitter. You think you've won her? You think a woman like Claire chooses a man like you? Look around. This is my world. And in my world, you don't get to stay standing. Marcus stepped forward, closing the space between them. The firelight caught his face, every line of it carved in defiance. Then maybe it's time your world burned. The two men stood inches apart, thunder shaking the windows. Claire's hands trembled at her sides, torn between terror and awe. Richard's hand shot to his jacket pocket. For a heartbeat, Claire's scream caught in her throat. But Marcus was faster. His hand gripped Richard's wrist like steel, twisting it until the hidden blade clattered to the floor. The The sound echoed like a gunshot. Richard gasped. His face contorted in pain. Marcus's voice was low, lethal. "You don't scare her anymore. And you damn sure don't scare me." He shoved Richard back, hard enough that he stumbled against the wall. For the first time, Richard looked small, not the king of the room, but a man exposed. Claire rushed to Marcus's side, her fingers gripping his arm. Her voice shook, but it was strong. "We're leaving. Tonight. And you'll never touch me again." Richard's face twisted, fury and humiliation warring in his eyes. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Not against Marcus. The storm swallowed them as they stepped out into the night. The rain drenched their clothes, the wind whipped at their skin, but for Claire, it felt like freedom. Marcus opened the car door for her, his eyes scanning the dark driveway, but Claire touched his hand before he could move away. "Why did you do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why risk everything for me?" Marcus looked at her, rain streaming down his face. "Because you asked me to be your husband, and I couldn't pretend without meaning it." Her chest tightened. The storm roared, but all she could hear was the thundering of her own heart. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "Then don't let this be just for one day." Marcus hesitated, his breath heavy. Then he nodded, his hand cupping her cheek. "It won't be." The car door shut. The engine roared to life. And together, they vanished into the night, not as strangers bound by lies, but as something deeper, something real. Richard stood alone, drenched in firelight, the blade still at his feet. His chest rose and fell, rage boiling like the storm outside. But no matter how loud it burned, one truth gnawed at him like rot. For the first time in his life, he had lost. By morning, the storm had passed. The streets glistened with rain, the world washed clean. Claire sat in Marcus's truck as the sun broke through the clouds, painting her face in gold. She turned to him, her voice soft but certain. "You were supposed to be a stranger, just one night. But now, I don't want to let you go." Marcus glanced at her, his hand finding hers. His deep voice was calm, but there was a weight to it, the weight of a man who meant every word. "Then don't." Claire smiled, tears glistening. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. And for Marcus, a man who had walked into that diner alone, the world suddenly didn't feel so lonely anymore. The storm was over, but their story had just begun. If this story left you stunned, if it pulled at you the way it pulled at me, make sure you subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. More stories like this are coming, and trust me, each one will take you on a ride you'll never forget.